Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. The last face that I saw before I went on vacation is Greg, and the first face that I saw when I got back is Greg. So it is always good to see you, my friend, and looking forward to talking about some edge prospects today. The one thing that we are going to spend, let's just briefly touch on, Greg, without getting into too much detail. The Titans did trade for L'Jarius Sneed while I was out in California. They did it 5 minutes before I was supposed to speak at my buddy's rehearsal dinner on Friday night, which I'm not very appreciative of. But Rand will have words at a later date. Just within the context of the league and what Kansas City is losing in their secondary, because between him and McDuffie, that's a pretty potent backfield.
Yeah, well, it's not just what and again, we won't spend a lot of time on the Titans because we know we have all events coming up, as it were.
We got a live show to talk about all
there
this
you
stuff.
go. There you go.
Great. It's going to be great.
But here's the one thing I'll say about Sneed, and then we'll leave it alone so we can get into more detail. At the install on May 3rd, he brings not only quality play, but he brings a swagger and an attitude, and I think in some ways that can be seen as just as important. So, because he is a press man corner, which doesn't mean he has to play press every snap, but you see him get right in the face of receivers. He's physical, he's aggressive, he's competitive. And, I'll just say this. They've now signed a Woozy and Sneed. So what was a major weakness a year ago is now a strength. And the one thing about this league now, the way it's going, is you can't cover up for bad corner play. And now they do not have bad corner play. So think of it this way. If you feel your corners aren't good enough, that shrinks your playbook. When you feel your corners are good and you can play man, that expands your defensive playbook. So we'll leave it at that, but that's really the way it works.
Yeah, and we'll do a full deep dive on Sneed. We're going to take a look at a very interesting free agency class on top of a draft class that, while we don't know who's going to be a part of it yet, is going to be equally as interesting coming up on May the 3rd. At the Analog Hotel. Greg has booked his flight. We're so looking forward to having a packed house at the Analog Room in the Hutton Hotel. Get your tickets at 1045thezone.com and make sure that you don't miss the best Titans draft and free agency breakdown that you could possibly find, that also comes with a full bar. That is not a small note.
Yeah. And I thought you were going to send me your private plane, Buck, but I guess I had to make my own plane reservations, huh?
Maybe next contract, Greg, I'll get the private plane negotiated into my deal. But for now, we're flying. We're flying commercial. PJ's up next. What does help a good secondary or a struggling secondary is pass rush, and we're going to be talking about some edge guys in this upcoming draft class today. There is no disputing that Dallas Turner is the top prospect coming out of Alabama. 6'4", 242. Really, really high-level player as a junior. And I wonder, Greg, what are the differences between him and Will Anderson coming out of the same university, now obviously a member of the Houston Texans and the top edge rusher off the board last year? How different are they as players?
Well, I'm just going to have to, for a moment, disagree with my host here. I don't view him as the top pass rush edge prospect in this draft, but we certainly can talk about Dallas Turner since you just did the beautiful intro.
Well, let me not get in your way here. That's obviously an important note, because it does seem like a lot of people view him as the top edge guy, but certainly
that's okay. And you know me well enough to know, and I hope people listening know me well enough, that I'm not one of those people that thinks, hey, I'm right and people are wrong if there's a difference of opinion. I like to think that reasonable, intelligent people can disagree about these things. But let's talk about Turner since you mentioned him.
Sure.
Because it doesn't matter what my list is. We want to talk about the players. But I'll tell you who I think it is when we get to him, in my mind anyway, based on tape. There's no question that Turner has the size, length, athleticism, explosiveness profile that you like to see from edge pass rushers. I didn't think his 2023 season was quite as good as his 2022 season. Now, that's not a function of traits. The traits are still the traits. But I think he needs some cultivation and development as far as pass rush moves, counters, to best maximize what are pretty impressive physical traits. He has really good arm length, which has become much talked about when it comes to offensive tackles and defensive edge pass rushers. But But I think that one of the things that'll help him is he can be moved around a bit. He doesn't just have to line up as an edge player. He can be kind of a movable chess piece or a joker, as I call him. But he does have clearly higher level athleticism. He's fluid. He's got natural quickness. He's got flexibility. He can bend. He can clear the arc. He can flatten his rush path. He's got all the traits that you ideally want. And by the way, just because I don't think he's my number one based on film, doesn't mean I don't think he can become a really good player.
No, absolutely. And honestly, Greg, I think that the wider difference in opinions that you can find on these prospects may at least for me opens my eyes to some things that I may not have seen watching these guys on the first time through, or taken away from game tape versus TV copy and stuff like that. Like, I think that as much variety of opinion as we can find on these guys helps kind of give you a well-rounded picture for those of us who are trying to learn as much about them as humanly possible. But certainly, as you mentioned, he's a freaky athlete, led the SEC in sacks last season. A team is definitely going to fall in love with this
For
guy
sure.
as
And
soon
like
as
I
they get
said,
an opportunity to add him.
and as I said, he's all the four guys we're going to talk about today are likely to be good players. I mean, degree of goodness or greatness, that remains to be seen. There's many variables. I always try to let you know that, let everybody listening know that there's many variables involved here. You know, there's very few transcendent prospects, guys that are just going to be great and you just can check off the box and they're going to be great. There's very few of those guys. So there's so many variables involved. So, you know, the four we're talking about, and we started with Turner, and we'll move on here in a sec. But, you know, there could be a number of different reasons why they succeed at a high level, succeed at a good level, don't succeed as much as you might think, or there have been guys who haven't really succeeded at all. We know that not all 32 players drafted in the first round in any draft become really good players. That's just the reality of it.
I would say that is a very diplomatic way to to talk about the inexact science of drafting. Absolutely. Well, another player that we'll look at today is Jared Verse, the redshirt junior out of Florida State, who, you know, had a different kind of trajectory through college after having only one scholarship offer coming out of high school, which is crazy.
Pretty amazing, isn't it?
It really is, to see some of the guys who only get these one or two scholarship offers who go on to be very high level players. And Jared Verse certainly had that opportunity once he got to Florida State. Very physical in the run game, very violent as far as a pass rusher goes. Greg, what does the tape show?
Yeah, his game is different than Turner's. Versus game is built on strength and power through his body and his hands. Now he's got explosive short areas, you know, strength, you know, to jar offensive tackles. He's got accelerating power to drive them back into the pocket. You can look at some sacks he had this year and even going back to 2022, where he literally just ran through offensive tackles. He was at his best with his hand in the ground in a three-point stance. You watch him when he's standing up in a two-point stance, and it's not the same. He tends to have false steps in a two-point stance. In a three-point stance, he comes off the ball with first step explosiveness that is really high level. No wasted steps. He attacks the edge. He sets up his speed to power. So that's his game. He's devastating when it comes to speed to power. And you also saw that he was purposeful with a plan to attack and set up left tackles, because he almost always lined up on the right, not 100%. But he's a very strong player. In some ways, because while he can bend the edge, he's not a true bender, Buck, in a strict sense. That's not really the foundation of his game. I would say he's a stronger version of Kayvon Thibodeau.
Now that's an interesting way to look at it. Kayvon Thibodeau, coming out of Oregon a couple of years ago, and to see his progression. Obviously, we're talking about them as prospects before they get to the pros, but Kayvon Thibodeau was such an interesting watch when he was in college, and maybe that's a product of the defense that he was playing in versus what we're talking about with Verse here. But I really like that as a comparison for them as college prospects. Not that, as you often reiterate, doesn't mean that's who they'll become at the next level. But at this
Yeah.
stage of their game, that's a pretty interesting
Yeah, because
comparison.
Thibodeau's another guy that both players' games are built on straight line linear power as opposed to flexibility and bend. You know, both can bend, enough, but they're not really bendy and flexible. To use our friend Coach Mac's line, neither one has motorcycle lean. They can't do that. So their games are built on linear straight line power, but I think Verse is just stronger.
With Verse, it's definitely a different skill set than what we'll talk about with the UCLA edge rusher Laiatu Latu. I wonder, Greg, if this isn't the player that you were referencing earlier when we talked about the top prospect.
This would be the player that I was referencing. I've seen a ton of Latu, and I really, really like his tape a lot. I mean,
yeah.
he's got size, he's got length, he's got really high level moves and counters. I mean, he's almost like a Mensa level guy when it comes to his moves and counters for a college player. I mean, really refined hand usage, really multiple moves in his arsenal. And he can motorcycle lean. I mean, he's one of those guys that has great body flexibility. Now, I think that he probably has to get a little stronger, but not much. It's not as if that's a weakness. But he is so competitive as well. He's plays with a ton of energy, and sometimes sacks can happen just from being so competitive and just playing with such relentless energy. We know that. There were two guys, and I actually talked with a coach about this. There were two guys who came to my mind, and this coach agreed with me, so it made me feel even a little smarter. Sometimes I need that, Buck. Sometimes I need to feel a little smarter.
Me telling you how smart you are doesn't get you by every once in a while?
On Twitter,
somebody knows what they're talking about?
On Twitter, I'm told that I'm an idiot a lot. So, sometimes it's okay, for a coach to tell me. So there's two guys that he reminds me of. And again, people are going to think, oh, well, these guys are great players. Well, that's not. When I talk about this, I hope people understand I'm talking about stylistically, the manner in which they play, not necessarily the fact that this guy's going to have that number of sacks in his first season in the league. We're talking about style. And two players. And as I said, this coach agreed with me, TJ Watt and Danielle Hunter. And that's who Latu kind of reminded me of. And as I said, I've seen an awful lot of them because I watched them last summer from 2022, and I watched a ton of them from this year in 2023. And I really like Latu. I again, we'll see. He's more of a stand-up guy, so he's probably an outside backer type, but he's going to rush the quarterback when you go to your sub front.
Yeah, 6'4", 261 coming out of Indianapolis. Seemed like the medical evaluations went well. He had previously retired due to
he was forced to retire because suffered a neck injury, and the medical staff at Washington would not clear him. But just so you know, he's actually at the combine, he was 6'5", 259.
Okay, an important clarification. That extra inch goes a long way, certainly, when we talk about that.
He's got really good length. For whatever it means, other than he's athletic, is he ran a 4.64 40, and that's really good at 6'5", 259.
When you talk about the development of these guys, and Washington continues to produce pro prospects on both sides of the trenches, the ability for him as an edge player to read and react, Greg, it seems like from people who are smarter than I about the scouting, when they talk about him, his progress as a redshirt senior seemed to be substantial in that area.
Yeah, no, he's don't forget, he didn't play football for 2 years.
Right.
So, he's had two really good seasons at UCLA. I thought he was really good this year. Just think of it this way. I mean, these are numbers, but numbers do reflect something. He's had 23.5 sacks and 34 tackles for loss. So that's a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. And that's not just, pass rush, obviously. So, he's got tremendous quickness, both playing the run, and he's, were there some run game snaps where he could play a little stronger, where he got locked on? Yeah. And I said, he needs to just get a little stronger. There's no question. But when you deal, to me, he's got the most complete pass rush arsenal in this class. And a really deep toolbox of pass rush moves. I mean, and you don't normally see that with college players, Buck.
Yeah, no, certainly, and that doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination, as you said, that they're finished products. But good to see him coming in at a more advanced level than your average edge prospect might. Edge guys, I don't know that there's a better name in the class than Chop Robinson. He's the Ferrari of this group, 0 to 60
Oh,
in no time at all. The guy is an absolute lightning bolt out there. Greg, as we talk about a lot of these prospects, it sounds like all of them could benefit from an NFL strength and conditioning program, of course, to kind of bulk up a little bit, and Chop Robinson is no different. But this is one of the most interesting players, one of the most fun players in the edge class to watch.
without question. And just, this guy, first of all, let's just talk about measurables. And again, measurables that's why we have a combine. So they do mean something for teams. You can say what you want, but they do mean something. And this kid at 6'3", 254 ran a 4.48 40 with a 10-yard split. That's like a wide receiver at 1.54, and a 20-yard shuttle of 4.25. That if people want to look up comparatively, Buck, that's better than a lot of wide receivers.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with a really high level athlete. Now, you want to talk about a guy with motorcycle lean. I mean, and he didn't have big sack numbers, but you have to watch the tape. The tape gives you context with Chop Robinson. For instance, I don't believe he had a statistic against Ohio State, sack or tackle, but you watch like the first 6 plays of the game. On 3 of them, he ran by and bent with flexibility against the right tackle for Ohio State like he wasn't even there. It was unbelievable. I mean, this guy has elite athleticism with the kind of twitch you just do not see often from edge pass rushers in college football. And while I said it did not result in a high sack total, there were many, many examples where his burst off the ball and speed and bend just overwhelmed offensive tackles. I'm not going to sit here and say he's Micah Parsons, because Micah Parsons is great, but you have to remember one thing. Micah Parsons was not a big pass rusher in college, and a lot of people did not know he could do what he's done in the NFL. And I'm not, like I said, I am not going to make that direct comparison, because Micah Parsons might be the best, or certainly top 3 for sure, edge pass rushers in the league. But Chop Robinson has tremendous bend, flexibility, first step explosiveness, probably weighs about the same, maybe a little more at 254. Their size is probably very similar. And as you said, it's not an exact science here when you make comparisons. And I'm not making that as an, direct apples to apples, but he's certainly not a finished product as a pass rusher. I mean, I think he needs to learn the craft of rushing the quarterback. But boy, is this guy an elite athlete and an elite bender.
Well, just to your point, Greg, it seems like it comes so naturally to him,
Yeah.
right? He just has these natural instincts when it comes to rushing the passer, that it's a great foundation point as you continue to develop this guy's tools and skill sets as you move forward, and even to the untrained eye, that seems to come through inherently when you watch his film.
Yeah. And again, as I keep saying, but it's so true, because I think, because obviously I'm on social media as you are, and a lot of people talk about these players as if this is what they are, and they're not going to be any different,
right,
after playing in the NFL for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and some aren't. There's no hard and fast rule, Buck. Each case is individual, but almost always you're going to see some kind of change in their game. Now, it's rarely dramatic. It's not like a guy who runs 4.8 is going to run a 4.4. That's not going to happen. But these guys get coached. It's full time. There's that's the way it works. It's a whole different deal. So someone like Chop Robinson, when I mentioned Danielle Hunter, people might say, "Oh my God, Danielle Hunter, he's got almost 100 sacks." Well, Danielle Hunter had 4.5 sacks in 3 years at LSU. People might not know that, and he was maybe a 3rd round pick, or he was not a 1st round pick. So things change when you get to the NFL, and it'll be very interesting to see with Chop Robinson, because the tape gives you the context with him. You cannot look at a number on a page and say he only had 4.5 sacks, so he can't rush the quarterback.
Yeah, I'm looking a lot more at edge guys or front seven players than I have been in the last couple of weeks, Greg, just because free agency changes,
Right.
teams draft needs and things of that nature. And Titans certainly need tackle help, but with Jeff Simmons and Harold Landry, it's a pretty thin defensive line edge group here in Tennessee. And I'd be curious to see what they add to go with Denard Wilson's defense. I'm not. We'll see what happens with the
Yeah.
trade back. I don't know for sure that they're staying at 7. Sounds like they're getting a lot of calls as far as that goes, and the quarterback draft will
They
dictate
will be
what they're
they
able
will
to
be
do.
getting calls because there's going to be players that teams are going to want, and depending on where they move back to, and depending, for instance, how they might have the edge rushers on their board or offensive tackles on their board. We know it's a good offensive tackle draft. If let's say it's, and again, I don't get into trades, but let's say a team at 13, I don't even know who's at 13, decides they want to move to 7, they still can get an offensive tackle at 13.
Yeah, that team is Vegas, and they have called the Titans. So that is.
Oh, I didn't. Okay. Well,
definitely.
I'm hearing from I wrote it down, and so now I know because I wrote it. No, just kidding. But I'm hearing that Vegas is very interested in maybe finding a quarterback, and if that's the case, they're going to have to move. Because I know which one that they like, and I'm going to leave that alone for now because I don't like to, talk about rumors, but I happen to know. So if the one they like, they would not be able to get at 13.
Vegas and Minnesota, something to keep an eye out for, and certainly we'll have so much to talk about on May the 3rd when the Titans put together their draft class, no matter whom they do or do not trade with. This free agency group is already pretty crazy in terms of the talent that they've been able to add, a lot of foundational instant impact starters as they try and get this thing up off the mat, Greg. I know you can't wait to get in front of the audience. The audience is already sending us questions to talk about, and they don't even have the draft class put together.
Well, that's
yet.
awesome. That is awesome because that's the whole point of the night, to interact with everybody and have a great time.
Yeah, and the best part of it for me is I can just sit up there, get you in, get you out, get the hell out of your way, and let you and the audience go back and forth.
That means I have to talk a lot, Buck? Oh man.
Yeah, you really struggle to talk, Greg.
I know. It's a tough deal. Only in my household do I do that,
You and me both.
Yeah.
So make sure you get your tickets. They're in the link if you're watching us on YouTube today, or in the description of the video if you're watching us on YouTube today. And if not, real simple, 1045thezone.com. Get them fast because they're selling way too quick. Not way too quickly. We're happy that they're selling quickly, but they're selling quick enough to where I got to warn you guys every week. Make sure you get yours because you don't want to get left out of what is a really, really unique event that Greg is kind enough to make himself a part of, and that we can't wait to be involved with as well.